Hey everyone, here we are with the second half of the motivation chapter, chapter 5. Feel like a little Conan O'Brien stuff going on with my hair. Anyways, we got some more good topics today that we'll finish off. And then I've got some little supplemental videos that are also going to appear in the announcement that I want to click over. It's just a pain to deal with YouTube videos and stuff through these time presentations. Okay, so let's get going. And I want to start right here. Okay, so this, on the way home from church today, we stopped at Taco Bell and we parked right next to these two cars. And it made me think of something. We bought my daughter, when she finished high school, she needed a reliable vehicle to get around in. Got her a little Kia Soul, and it's been just a really good car. But one of those things, she has a green one. It's a little more vibrant green than the one you see in the background. But it was amazing. Once we got that car for her, and as we're driving around Abilene, which isn't a real big town, just every little green Kia Soul that I'd see, I'd think it was her. And so I'd have to get in really close and see the license plate or see the stuff hanging from the mirror or see her or not see her to realize if that was the person I was looking for. It's amazing how many green Kia Souls and just Souls in general. Actually, her roommate had one of those brown ones as well that both lived at the house. Once the Kia Soul kind of became part of my world, it's amazing how many times I saw them. Okay, so with these motivation theories, and really with all these ideas in the soft sciences, where we're dealing with theories and ideas and concepts, my hope and goal for you, as not just with motivation, but with all of our topics, is once that you're made aware of these topics, you start to see them everywhere, because they are everywhere. These theories and concepts and models and principles, they have to do with people, and particularly people working together. And so since as business people, business-minded people who are focusing on getting the most out of people and organizations, I really hope and expect you to begin seeing these concepts just kind of everywhere you look. Okay, so as we go through these, just kind of remember that's kind of the goal and my hope for you, not only with these concepts, but in all of them. Once you're aware of them, you begin seeing them everywhere. And since we understand the theories, that can help lead us to making better decisions. All right, so let's do this one. Page 121 in the book talks about justice, organizational justice. And for some reason, when they made the PowerPoint for this chapter, they didn't include a justice slide. So I just typed it in, but wanted to include it again within motivation. And what they do is they use the idea of this distributive justice to tie into equity theory, which personally I never really made the connection before, but now that I see that they have done it this way, I understand why they did. But this idea of treating employees fairly, okay, is both morally correct and good for employee motivation, loyalty, and well-being. You probably saw an announcement today that I've just secured a new position, and I'm excited about that. And so without saying bad things, just know that this is true. I've kind of been living this for the last several years. So justice, you wanted to be treated just and fairly. So we've got two different types. We've got distributive justice, and then we've got procedural justice. And really distributive justice has to do with the perceived fairness of how you distribute goods and resources and opportunity, or I think maybe we hit before, having to share the burden. So distributive justice, the definition that they use right here in this chapter, which ties into equity theory, they talk about this perceived fairness in these ratios of inputs to outcomes and relative to someone else. That's really an equity theory definition for distributive justice, but we'll go with it. Okay, so again, just distributive justice, how things are distributed. Is it perceived as fair? Is what I get fair in relation to what I put into it compared to this other person, what they get based on what they put into it? Those are the ratios. Okay, so one of these, distributive justice. And let's look at equity theory. Okay, so equity theory has to do with this idea of perceptions of inputs to outcomes. Let me click on this. Inputs to outcomes, and in particular in relation to someone else. So this kind of gives us indication why companies like to keep compensation kind of quiet. There are some companies that pride themselves in being transparent so that everybody knows where everybody else stands. But a lot of times they like to keep it quiet. Stacey Adams is the one generally attributed with developing equity theory and then researched by others. One of the classic studies on equity theory had to do with proofreading. So an experiment was set up. They brought in a person, like, okay, I'm going to take a little liberty, brought in a person for a part-time job, told that it was a part-time job, told what the task was, that it was going to be reading through a manuscript, and they would be paid per page. And so the researchers knew that on each page how many mistakes there were. And so they would bring people in and they would say, you know, you're not really qualified, but we're in a bind. I'm going to give you the job. And so I'm going to pay you 50 cents a page. Person says, all right, let's get to work. So they get to work. The researchers record the base level of performance. How many mistakes did they catch? And then how quickly did they perform? How many pages per hour or day or whatever the outcome was. And so after they got a base level of performance, then this other person was introduced into the context who was part of the experiment. And that they would sit there and work. They kind of realize that this other person's doing the same job. They take a little break. The one who comes in later says something about, boy, I'm not qualified for this, but at $1 a page, who can beat it? So it just planted a seed in the person who was the subject in the experiment. Hey, we're both not qualified, underqualified. I'm getting paid 50 cents a page. This guy's getting paid $1 a page. And they watch what happens to performance. Quality, how many mistakes did they catch? And quantity, how fast, what's their rate that they're going through? And what they found, if you can kind of think through it, if you're sitting next to this person, find out that you're both bringing the same inputs, right here, my inputs and the other inputs, but they're taking home twice as much. Equity theory says we are then motivated, that's why it's a motivation model, we're motivated to restore the equity. And so what they found is that these people, the ones who realize that they're being under-rewarded, they tend to speed up. And their quality would go down, their rate would go up, so that at the end of the day, they were taking home about the same amount of money. That's equity theory. When there is a perception of inequity, we are motivated to restore the equity. So you can also kind of flip it the other way. Let's pretend like you're told that you're not really that qualified. Oh, we'll pay you $1 a page this time. This is the new person in the experiment. And then at a magic time, this other person comes in and they sit and they work. This one realizes they're doing the same thing. During a conversation, hey, I'm not really qualified, this person says, but for 50 cents a page, how could I say no? Okay, so all of a sudden this one, you know, is making $1 a page and they're not really qualified. This one is making 50 cents a page. They're making half as much. So now this person is over rewarded. And so what happens to performance? And kind of the conclusion was what they do is they tend to slow down. They slow down, they focus more on quality. The rate changes, it drops. But it's only temporarily. And so after a while, they kind of start to think, well, maybe I shouldn't be comparing maybe they are getting paid more than they're as much as they're worth, half as much as me. Maybe I'm better, maybe I'm faster. Something changes. So for a while, they'll slow down so that the equity is restored. But then after a while, they'll realize that I'm not really going to compare myself to that person. Okay, how about another one? So you're making 50 cents a page, you're not qualified. This other person comes in, they're working, they're reading. At the magical moment, they say, hey, at $1 a page, I couldn't say no to this, which catches this person's interest. And then this person says, I never thought that my experience proofreading younger in life would ever pay off. Okay, I never thought that my training and maybe my education in grammar and English and journalism or whatever it may be would pay off in this way for a short-term job. So now this person, this is again the subject in the experiment, they watch to see what happens to performance. And this all goes back to that individual's perception. So all of a sudden they're getting paid less, but they bring less to the table. So if the ratio in their mind is about the same as this ratio for this other person, then if the ratios are equal, then they won't really do anything different. But when there's an inequity, there will be a difference. Okay, so Interesting, interesting, interesting. Again, as a motivation model. Now, I've posted a video back in the assignment right here, and if you hadn't already seen it by now, I want you to go see it. It's a really good video, and it has to do with monkeys and grapes and cucumbers. So I encourage you to go watch that. Okay, the next one is procedural justice. So again, distributive justice, and then we use that to talk about equity theory as they've outlined it in the book. Procedural justice has to do with the procedures, and are the procedures fair? And going back, it says in organizations that are just and there's fairness, that tends to lead to motivation and commitment and satisfaction and people feeling valued. When there's not justice, then you got problems. Okay, so procedural justice has to do with the fairness of the procedures used to decide the distribution of resources or opportunities or whatever those things. So, if this thing is going to be cut or eliminated, do we have a fair process for determining that? Was there a fair opportunity to put your voice in, to be heard? Were there guidelines and standards so that everybody who goes through this was treated fairly in the procedure, and knowing how all the decisions were made, right? So again, just kind of look through that. Again, I feel like I've been kind of living some of this in recent years. All right, here we go. Expectancy theory. This is probably the best model because it's kind of an all-encompassing model. It's kind of a meta model. So this one, expectancy theory, this is Vroom. The heart of the model is right here. E to P, P to O. Effort leads to performance. Performance leads to outcome. And it can be multiple levels of outcome. So here, let's go back. So effort leads to performance. Remember, performance is a function of want to and able to at its most basic. Want to and able to. That Mars model from way back earlier brought in a bunch of other things, but really at its basic, it's do people want to do it and are they able to do it? This chapter is focusing in on the want to. That's the motivation. Why would they want to do it? So performance, a lot of times we like to think of is goal attainment. Are you doing what you set out to do? Now it's more complicated. Effectiveness can be a lot of different things and it's just a lot more complicated. But at its core, really, performance is, did you do what you set out to do? Did you accomplish your goal? Okay, want to and able to. So goal setting theory is already in here. This effort to performance, if I exert the effort, will I reach the level of performance? Right here, E to P, expectancy. That's the expectancies. There are two of them for expectancy theory. You all have already experienced this too. I set you up a couple of weeks ago with the juggling. And so I said, now that you've seen this, what's the problem? Your self-efficacy. Now again, Vroom says this, and Bandera says it's not really self-efficacy. It's E to P is its own thing, and self-efficacy is its own thing. But those two things are really kind of closely related. So that E to P expectancy, the probability that a specific effort level will result in a specific performance level. So when I asked you, can you juggle? What's your confidence in your ability to do that? For those of you who said, I'm not going to do that, I can't do that. Okay, that would be near a 0. And then some of you said, well, I can do that. Maybe a 0.8, 0.9, maybe 100% confidence that you can do it. So if this is down close to 0, this expectancy theory is a multiplicative model. So if this is a 0 right here, that I can't, if I exert the effort, I will not be able to perform, then you won't perform. The whole model just stops because that's going to be a 0 that gets multiplied through. Okay, so effort. This has to do with self-efficacy. It has to do with confidence. This is where it's important for the one in charge to boost this in people. You can do it. I have confidence in you. I'm going to train you. I'm going to teach you. And then you're going to be able to do this. And I'm going to build that confidence in you. Okay, so that's what we call E1 in this model. The first expectancy, E1, is the E to P expectancy. If I exert effort, what is the probability that I will perform? ranges from 0 to 1. This one right here, this is this E2. It's the expectancy that if I perform, I will get the outcome that I hope for or is promised to me. So here's an example. In class, back in the old days when I was creative and had energy, I would bring in music for the students. And when we talked about expectancy theory, I would pick 3 volunteers. I had to pick the right ones and have them leave. Just kind of normal people, not my big extroverts, but just kind of normal people. I'd have them leave the room, and then I would tell the students in class that I'm going to, put this model into action. And so the first person would come in while the other 2 stayed outside, and I would play the music. And I would tell the person that I have a task for them to perform. They're going to do it. I want them to perform an interpretive movement, an interpretive dance to the music. And I would, know that I was doing that day, and I'd bring in some change in my pocket. So maybe like, 7 or 8 cents, and I would put it on the table in front of the room right by the student, and I would back away. I'd get far away from the table, and I would let them know that if they do the interpretive dance, they can have that 8 cents. But if they don't do the interpretive dance, I keep the 8 cents and they get nothing. Okay? What do you think? How many people would do that in front of a classroom of 25 or 30 people? How many kind of normal people, like I said, not my extroverts who just don't need any excuse to do that. What do you think? The answer is almost none. None of them would do that. Did they believe, okay, could they do it? Yes, they could. I picked a very simple exercise for them. Everybody could. So that E to P, 1, should have been pretty high. What about this second expectancy? Did they believe that they would get the 8 cents for doing the dance? By me stepping far away from the table where they could just grab it in their hand and put it in their pocket, they should have believed that they would get it. But why didn't they do it? Well, that has to do with the valence. The outcome wasn't tasty enough. This goes back to operant conditioning. Again, here's another model at play within this. The second person would come in, and I'd give them the same directions. If you do this interpretive movement, I'll make it worth your while. And I'll kind of pat around at my pants and, oh, I forgot to bring my checkbook. If you do this dance for me in front of the class, I will tomorrow, because I don't have my checkbook with me because I forgot it, I will write you a personal check out of my very own bank account for $500. How many people do you think did it? The answer is none of them. Why? Was now this tasty enough? The valence, the desirability of the outcome? Absolutely. Did they believe that they could do the dance? Absolutely. Did they believe that I would actually write a check for $500 of my own money to have them do this simple little example in front of the class? They didn't. They didn't. And so because it's a multiplicative model with a probability of 0, they said, no way, you're not going to give me that. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so they would sit down, I'd bring in that third person. And the third person, I'd give the exact same directions. And I said, if you do this for me, I'll give you 10 points on your next assignment. Everybody danced, and they did it every single semester. So unlike Maslow's need hierarchy and Alderfer, now you can mess a little bit with McClellan and kind of place people in situations that satisfy their needs. This is known as a prescriptive model rather than just simply a descriptive model. So you could use this today at work to bring about the outcome that you need. Just like operant conditioning. Again, operant conditioning is in here. If you perform, you will get the outcome that comes along with it. But this one is a little more sophisticated because it says people are gauging the probability that you're actually going to do that and receive it. What about fairness? Where does justice, where does equity come in? Well, equity also comes in right here, comes in between these. So that person danced, they get 8 cents. I dance, I get $500. That person danced, and they get 10 points on their next assignment. Is that fair? Is that fair? Well, of course, that wouldn't be fair, but if they all kind of got rewards in relation to what they did and their ability, and okay, then that would be regarded as fair, and people would do it. So equity theory is in here, operant conditioning is in here, training and development is in here, goal setting is also in here. Self-efficacy is in here. So this is one great model. And before leaving this one, I would also, with my students in class, I would have them list some things, different things that we could be doing other than class at that moment. And so, I would ask one, hey, what could you be doing right now? If it's in the morning, one of them would always say, well, I could be sleeping. And so we'll put a number on that. How, going back to economics, utility, how many utils, how many measures of goodness would you, student, put on sleeping right now? And they'd give me a number, 200. And I said, well, what else could we be doing? Well, we could be eating. Well, how many utils would you put on that compared to sleeping? Well, I put 300 on that. And so we go through all these different possibilities. And I say, well, how many utils are you getting for being here in this class right now? And then they all kind of confess, and they all kind of, well, 50. And I said, well, why are you here then? Why are you in class when these other things would bring you greater satisfaction? And they think about it. And so then I kind of point out to them, well, what does this class lead to? What does being here today lead to? Well, it leads to us passing the course. And that leads to getting a degree. And that leads to getting this job and this lifestyle that I find is important and desirable at this stage in life. So you've got these bigger outcomes further down the road that have a lot of utility. And then they spill back because it's a second or third or fourth level outcome. That is so big. It's got so much draw on it that it's going to pull us into class early in the morning on Monday, Wednesday, Friday to listen to this one talk about motivation theory when they could be sleeping or eating or running or whatever they do to derive satisfaction. So again, wonderful model. This is expectancy theory. E to P, effort to performance, performance to outcome, two expectancies, and these are probabilities. They're assessments in your brain. Do I think that I will be able to perform if I exert effort? And if I do exert effort, if I do perform, will I get that reward that I was promised or that I hoped for? And then valence has to do with the satisfaction, the acceptability, the desirableness of these different outcomes, and knowing that they're going to be second and third level outcomes. Great model. I love it. It's one of my favorites. And very much a prescriptive model in that you can put it into play. Those interpretive dance things, I tell the students up front what's going to happen, and it does happen every single time. Every single time. Good. Okay, so here's expectancy theory in practice, how to increase that E to P, how to increase your P to O, and then how to increase those the valence of the outcomes as well. So take a look at that. Go back and look in the book. Again, a great model. I'm doing it out of order. Remember last week, I went past it so that I could introduce goal setting theory and equity theory before talking about expectancy theory. So it's out of order, but it's earlier back in the chapter. Okay, job design. So now we're kind of really taking a jump to something else, and this has to do with making jobs. So what I do with my undergrads is I give them a challenge, and I have them design a company. And that company, just kind of simple, make paper airplanes, a paper airplane company. And you have 30 people. This benefactor has come in. They really like paper airplanes. They've given you enough money as an organizational consultant to design a company with 30 jobs. And so we talk about line positions and staff positions. We talk about the different, how to departmentalize and is it a functional design? Is it a product design? Is it a geographic design? We're coming back to this in 2 weeks in this book as well. But when we get down to that folder job, they always have folders. People are folding the paper airplanes. How do you make those jobs motivating? How do you get people excited about coming to work and doing that day after day after day? We have techniques, and those techniques are based in part of motivation theory, the want-to dimension. All right, so with that, here's our old friend Fred Taylor, scientific management. So they're just kind of reminding us right here of how we have traditionally organized workers. And this is one thing when we do the paper airplane company, I have to remind them of this. We do need this. Division of labor, going back to Adam Smith, that is a good way to organize folks and get a lot of productivity. But as we remember from the Hawthorne studies said we need to treat people as people. And if you do, you can get a lot better outcomes and not just performance, but you can also get satisfaction and commitment and motivation and just a lot of different feelings. So we have to remember this, that the job specialization does improve work efficiency. The problems with it, they're not motivated. It's boring. They're not involved. They're just a machine part. And then they don't show up. Higher wages, they tend to pay them more. That's that continuance commitment. I can't afford to leave this even though I don't enjoy it because I'm getting paid too much. But is that really what you want in your people? They don't like it and they feel trapped. And then again, this affects the work quality, plus and minus on that. So with that, so how do we do this? We still want those benefits of specialization and division of labor, but we also want a good, motivated, satisfied, committed, high-performing workplace. So the job characteristics model is one of these models that shows this. And I brought this up when we talked about satisfaction. That big multi-dimensional model that I found online had this in it. Okay, so what this says right here, what we want, we'll start over here. What we want, we want people to be motivated, and not just extrinsic motivation, but intrinsic motivation. We want that growth, kind of high level needs, that Alderfer growth need, Maslow's way up there towards self-actualization where growth occurs. We want people to be satisfied. Remember we talked about satisfaction, the different facets, and we want them to be effective. We want them to do well in their work. This is what we're shooting for as ones in charge. And so how do we do that? Well, job characteristics model says we have basically 5 dimensions over here that we can control and tweak in order to bring about these outcomes. And they go through, this is where org behavior is different. We recognize the peopleness of people in the psychology. We found that when people perceive their work as meaningful, again, almost going back to Hawthorne, when they find their work as meaningful, it tends to bring about better outcomes. When they feel like they have some responsibility, it tends to bring about better outcomes. And when they know how well they're doing, that's that feedback. They know if they're on track. It goes back to goal setting theory. If they know how they're doing, it's also going to help with these outcomes. Okay, and then this also points out that there are individual differences, which we've brought up in the individual chapters as well. Okay, but these are the dimensions. So skill variety. This is what you get to tweak and adjust and design within organizations. Jobs that have more skills tend to be more motivating. The more skills and things that you have to do in order to complete the task are going to be more motivating than if you just have one or very few skills involved. So give them the ability to do and bring in different things in their work. Task identity has to do with how well you identify with the whole task. So high task identity means that you identify with the completed task. Low task identity means you just identify with a small part of it. And I think I may have brought up my brothers are architects. And they have high task identity. When I go visit them, they'll take me by a place and say, I was responsible for that. Actually, my oldest brother was one of the architects on the business building at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And so he knows all about the building. He was involved in the design and the construction of it. But I have another brother who does houses. And when we go visit, he'll drive us by and show us the houses. That a house that you see right there, that used to be an idea in my head after talking to the clients. And there it is. That's high task identity. Low task identity would be maybe someone who, was an assistant electrician. And so they went in and put in the switch plate covers in some of the rooms. That's low task identity. I think with my job as a professor, I tend to meet freshmen and then I teach them through my program. So by the time they graduate, I feel like I've had a lot of influence on them, where if you just were able to be together for a class, there'd be a little less in a larger, bigger program. Task significance has to do with, the way I like to think of it is, what happens if you mess up? Okay, so that electrician's assistant maybe is putting on the switch plate covers. If one isn't put on quite right, it's really not a big deal. You can go back and fix it. But what if you're a mechanic on an airline and you don't do something right? That could be a big deal. What if you work in a hospital and you're performing surgery on someone and you mess up and something big happens? That could be a big That could be a big problem and a big mistake. So task significance has to do with how important is your job in doing this thing. And just I like to think of what happens if you mess up. If there's a big cost, that's significant. If there's a little cost, that's less significant. Okay, as far as this dimension goes. Autonomous means you get to decide by yourself. So in tasks where you have autonomy to decide how you're going to do it, that brings about these greater feelings of responsibility. Remember back in Henry Ford's plan, those videos we saw with Fred Taylor. Okay, the worker's job was not to think and make decisions. It was just simply to follow the orders from the brain. The managers and the ones who designed the organization, they train people. You just do, you don't ask, you don't question, just do what I tell you to do. That stripped away all autonomy. So autonomy has to do with responsibility. And then lastly is that feedback from the job. So these are the 5 core fundamental. The book adds a couple more, which you can look at, but these are kind of the classic dimensions from the job characteristics model. Skill variety, the more things that you can bring in and do, the more interesting and motivating the job. Task identity, the more you identify with the completed task also brings about a greater sense of meaningfulness. And then task significance, that the importance of what you're doing. Okay, and there are other little tricks. The fish philosophy is a wonderful way to talk about that. And really, I can't think of it in the book, so I'll bring it up right now. Fish philosophy, the Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle. We got to visit with students Thanksgiving before last. They introduced actually a model philosophy came out of that. Early 2000s, seemed like it was in the 2000s. The model was, you're not just selling fish, you're helping people in need. You're not just doing a job that you may not think of as important, but if you really think about what you're doing, you are helping people in need. This person comes to you and they're in a bind, they don't have the expertise, they need help. And so in that moment, you in your position, you engage with this fellow human being and you help them solve a problem. And kind of that fish philosophy idea. When we're hopefully old and laying on our deathbed and looking back over our lives and thinking, what did I do? That we don't think that we just wasted it in this job, but that you invested your time serving others. That's meaningful and that is significant. So it's just a change in attitude and perspective. So again, these things right here, that goes back to meaningfulness. Autonomy has to do with responsibility, and then the feedback from the job, knowledge of results. One other last little thing before I leave this one onto the next slide. When the kids were little, we'd have to give them baths. Our old house has the 2 knobs with the hot and the cold, and you got to blend it. So you start off with the hot to get the hot coming out, and then you got to turn the cold on. Then you have to adjust them so it's the right temperature for a little person to sit in and not be uncomfortable one way or the other. So my job is to mess with the hot and the cold until the water in the bath is right for the kid. I guess we do that with showers and other things as well. But to me, that's what these are. These are like 5 different knobs that you have access to that you can turn and tweak to get the right outcomes over here, the right temperature. Okay, so if that helps your thinking, then yeah, feel free to use that. All right, so here, let's go and look at the next one. Job rotation and job enlargement. So we talked about this with the paper airplane company. You can talk about it too with your job. But job rotation. Some organizations, the jobs, you just can't let everybody do everything. We still have to have that division of labor. I kind of like to think of my first job was at a fast food restaurant. You couldn't have one person taking the order and then go back and make the food and then come up and do their drinks and then go clean up the tables and clean out the bathroom and go outside and pick up trash. You wouldn't want one person doing all that. You got to be hygienic. You need to have some specialization, taking the money at the drive-through, all those different things. So what we would do is that each person on staff, on shift that night, we'd all have our own little responsibilities. And on that shift, that's what we did. Now, maybe the next week, so that it's just not the same thing over and over again, we would rotate through jobs. And so tonight, I get to work the front counter and do the front counter stuff. And then next time, I'll go back and make the food. and the next time I'll go do this. So it's a way to kind of alleviate, I don't say the monotony, but it's the way to alleviate and give you different things to do and build that skill variety, instead of just one thing over and over and over again. But still, it works with division of labor as well. Some jobs you're able to do that. Okay, in some organizations you're able to do that. Job enlargement has to do with adding tasks to an existing job. So maybe as I'm also preparing food, maybe if it's a little slower, I can go back and cook some of the food back in the kitchen. Or maybe I can get there a little earlier and we can overlap shifts. But job enlargement is adding tasks to an existing job. So instead of just being so defined in one little thing, now you're going to get to be part of the bigger picture of it. So task identity is part of that. So job enlargement, job enrichment, job enlargement, job rotation, and job enrichment is the other thing. And that's getting people, basically it's job growth type things where you enrich the job, you give them training, you give them different benefits to help them grow and develop, maybe kind of move up the Maslow's need hierarchy, to become bigger and more aware and more able to do things. So job enrichment, a sabbatical opportunity from a professor, research funds, travel funds, all those things would be job enrichment types of things. Okay, so again, going back to this is a way that we could have used that back in those factories from 100 years ago. You could rotate people through jobs, have them do different things on different days, and really that's a form of job enlargement as well. But this one, you would be doing more of those things in one shift. This one, you're still doing a fewer things in one shift, but across shifts, you kind of rotate through, right? There's job enrichment. Okay, so giving employees more responsibility for scheduling, that gets them involved in the decision making. That goes back to autonomy and the responsibility for that. Okay, so they talk about natural grouping and then some of these other things. Okay, so job enrichment. All right, so that is it. We went through the chapter, again, first half last week, and then this kind of finished off the rest of the chapter this week. So again, go back to the assignment and look at the specific questions. But what I'm going to want you to do is what we did last week, is just go through and identify, see these things, identify how you see these things at work, and know other organizations that you're a part of. And then, like I said, hopefully once you understand them and recognize that they exist, like those green Kia souls, that you will begin to see them everywhere. And from a prescriptive model, once you see them, then you have some idea of how to use them to make that workplace more effective and wonderful for everybody. So that is it. Hope that helped. We'll keep doing it. Thanks. Bye.